Ruby's. Let me rewind. Welcome to Ruby's March briefing. This is the second in our communication series. We're doing a four-part series on communication. And today we are very happy to have with us Bobby Clark. Bobby is a very seasoned communications strategist. He worked on the Howard Dean presidential campaign back in the day. He worked on marriage equality campaigns and a lot of other things, and most recently has been serving as a strategic advisor to the Heartland Fund and to the Winning Jobs narrative, which has only been around for a couple of years, but I've been sitting in on their briefings and they've really done just an incredible job of doing independent research and pulling together all these different polling and messaging outfits to create this winning jobs narrative that you'll hear about that resonates so well with rural and working people. It's been an invaluable contribution to our understanding about how to be more effective communicators with rural and working people. So as usual, we'll have Bobby present for about half an hour, and then we'll have a half hour for Q&A, and feel free to start putting questions in the chat along the way if you would like to. So with that, Bobby, thanks so much for being here, and you can go ahead and share your screen and get started.
Having me. All right. Are we good? You see this?
We are good.
Great. As Erica said, I'm a senior advisor to the Heartland Fund, the Rural Democracy Initiative, and I'm actually loaned by the Heartland Fund to the Winning Jobs narrative. And the Winning Jobs narrative actually had its origin with the Heartland. It wasn't intended to be a rural narrative per se, but it has its origins with the Heartland Fund and Rural Democracy Initiative. We were having conversations with a lot of RDI's grantees around the country after the 2022 election, and there were a lot of very upset folks about how the election had gone in 2022, in 2020, and in many rural areas. And there was a debate happening about whether the shifts that people were seeing were at their root, were they cultural or was it economic? And ultimately we concluded that it's really difficult to disentangle those things, that everything cultural is economic and everything economic is cultural. And at the end of the day, it just became clear that the progressives, Democrats, lacked an economic narrative that really resonated any longer with rural voters and actually with working class voters more broadly. As we started to speak with our friends who do work in the Latino community and the African American community and the API community, just generally people doing voter engagement, there was a growing concern that we were seeing a shift among working class folks to the right that we needed to do something about. And the premise of Winning Jobs narrative was there must be a core economic narrative that resonates strongly across race and geography, and we're going to go try to find that. And so we set about the project with the goal of identifying that. Ultimately, we wanted to be able to provide a narrative architecture that could both be used to frame issues and also to be used to frame conversations with voters around elections. And it's been a massive project. As Erica said, we reviewed decades of research to start. We did 3,000 open-ended conversations with voters all around the country just to listen for 6 months. And then we're at the point where we've completed, I believe we may have just passed 200,000 completed survey responses, because we did a bunch of surveys to test the narrative and ensure that we had what we thought were the core elements. And then we've been applying those in message testing since, just to make sure that they work and to show how they work across a range of issues. And these are the 5 key elements. The first is center and lead with working people. They're the heroes. They need to feel seen and prioritized. And they haven't for a long time. Actually, frankly, by either party, working people generally have felt neglected. Valuing and supporting work to connect around deeply held and widely shared values around work and the importance of work. Situate working people as the engines of our economy. That's middle out economics. If you hear President Biden, he's going to say it again in the speech this week, that we need to grow the economy from the bottom up, middle out, not the top down. That's what he's talking about, is this idea of middle out economics. And we're going to talk about that more. Positioning government in a supporting and not a starring role. We advocate for an active role for government. on the center left side of things, and historically we've tended to make government the subject too much in our advocacy and policies and what policies can do for people, and no one wants to be done for. People, we're happy to be equipped. We don't want to be rescued, and so we need to get the relationship right. And then relating our policies, even targeted policies, like something like student debt relief or policies that impact only farmers. We do a better job with those messages and building broad public support if we talk about the benefits of those policies more broadly, not just for the people directly impacted, but for all of us in the economy overall. And so I'm going to show you, this is an example of what this can look
We are like a family here. When our workers do well, we all do well. So it matters that Catherine Cortez Masto is all about making sure we have the opportunities and tools to build a good life. Because Catherine Cortez Masto values work and values workers. She's helping create jobs, lower healthcare costs, and fix supply chains. Hardworking Nevadans are bringing us back. Catherine Cortez Masto is good for workers and good for business.
Somos PAC is responsible for the content of this app.
So that was one of the best testing. One of our close partners in winning jobs is Somos Votantes. They're the largest Latino voter engagement program in the country. This is one of the better testing ads in Nevada in 2022. And it has all five elements. And again, you'll all have access to this deck. I'm gonna share it out and you can take a look at all these materials. So you can kind of see what the narrative looks like actually put into practice. I have an example of a script from Somos. They're incredibly message disciplined with every tweet, with every script. They're 100% winning jobs. And so I'm not going to dwell on these, but I'm just going to point out that there are lots of examples of Somos communicating about all of the elements in their Twitter feed. So you can refer back to that. So all of those elements are important. None of them are not important. We've called out a couple of things as strategic imperatives for 2024 that we feel really strongly about. One is that we need to win on the economic frame. And I'm going to go into more detail about that. So this is the third year in a row. We just came out of the field. The slide that I'm showing you, the graph is from a year ago. I have new data to report on that I've called out on the right. We've asked this in a number, and in 2022, right about this time, we did another survey. In 2022, we asked the question, who do you trust to look out for economic well-being of people like you? Last year, we asked the question, whose approach do you trust more on the economy? We just asked it again, exactly that same way with the same research shop. The numbers are generally about exactly the same. It was pretty close about a year ago. It's Republicans +5 now in 2022. That's slightly differently worded question. We were underwater by 4. And more concerning is the subgroup information. So like Black people that we assume to be part of a core Democratic base, like Black voters, are generally right about there. I think they were at 62% in 2022 on the trust to look out for economic well-being of people like you. And then right about the same percentage as when we just re-asked this question just now with fresh new data that we reported on last Friday. And I'm going to share out a link with Erica for that presentation as well, so you'll all have that. So overall approach in the economy, really, really important issue for voters, and it is not a strength, and it's something that we can actually move the dial on and need to. Because if we do, we can actually lock down a Democratic base, and we can actually make some inroads with people who are movable. And then President Biden does express generally, in my lifetime, I actually don't remember Democrats ever having a coherent economic approach that they've articulated. We tend to talk about very, very, very narrow issues, and I say I am a Democrat. I'm not here actually speaking for the Democratic Party, but I believe in this progressive approach. I believe in progressive policies, and we haven't had, whether through the party or actually on the left generally, we haven't articulated a coherent theory of our approach to the economy overall. President Biden has. He talks about needing to build the economy from the bottom up and middle out, and we think that's really important. It's something you're definitely, just as a teaser for the State of the Union. This came out just a couple of days ago from Ben LeVault, communications director, flagging what we can expect. I think we need to build the economy from the bottom up and middle out, and talking about some of their accomplishments and contrasting with the MAGA Republican agenda which includes rewarding billionaires and corporations, and also taking away our rights and freedoms. The shift to from what President Biden is talking about is a shift in thinking about what actually drives the economy. For 40 years, since Ronald Reagan ushered in what George Bush called voodoo economics, our policy making has really been dominated by this idea that corporations and wealthy people are economically generative, and so policies that unburden them are policies that have a ripple effect in the economy overall. The middle out idea is part of this sort of shift that the president has made, that is flipping the order of that. That actually what's true is that money in the pockets of everyday people, small businesses, family farmers, that's what's economically generative. Businesses ultimately benefit from that, corporations, but the economy grows when we prioritize, and it's strong when we prioritize everyday people. And that led the New York Times to refer to President Biden as the first post-Reagan president, a very big deal, very progressive policy agenda. So we've spent a lot of the last year, and as I said, all 5 of the narrative elements we feel strongly about. We feel incredibly strongly about number 3, which is situate working people as the engines of the economy. If the free market message that you see here on the right, if we present that to people unchallenged, it makes sense. 75% of Black voters, for example, core progressive voters will say that makes sense and say that and support it. But if it's challenged with this other idea that no, actually, working people are the engines that drive the economy, when everyday Americans have the tools to succeed, like good paying jobs and affordable healthcare and housing, they can support their local businesses and take care of their families and contribute to their communities. We win. Generally, we're in the mid-60s, and the free market message is in the mid-30s, so it's a really powerful contrast. A year ago, we, for the first time, tried a split to try that contrast with and without partisan attribution. And so without partisan attribution, a year ago, the middle-out message won by 62-36 over the trickle-down message. And you see, even with like very conservative folks, like white non-college voters, 22-point advantage. With strong advantage with folks you would think of as part of a progressive base, including turnout Democrats. With partisan attribution, of course, it lost support because partisan perspectives have a huge influence on how people filter things. But on balance, it still works really, really strongly for the Democratic side of things. So it actually moves some base voters even further in support of that frame. And it lost ground with white non-college voters, but only ended up -4. And so that's not a bad place to be. We, in one of our surveys recently, we ended up with partisan attribution, still 20% of Republican voters said that they prefer the Democrats' approach, which is prioritizing everyday people as opposed to tax cuts for the rich and corporations. So, and we, in the survey a year ago, sorry, let me move my window around a little bit. We presented the back and forth messaging on those 2 ideas. We layered in democratic accomplishments, and we actually, as you see, in confidence on approach to the economy, we're really kind of locked down a progressive base. And also importantly, improve vote motivation by turnout Democrats, people who will actually vote for Democrats if they just show up. They went from 17% extremely likely to vote to 41% extremely likely to vote. And one of the things we've seen in qualitative around exploring these economic approaches is people will say enthusiastically, heck yeah, that's right. We're the engines of the economy. Prioritize us. We've taken a backseat to corporations, for far too long, and getting a raw deal. And their only question is, will it really happen? Like, yes, that's what I want. I want our leaders to do that, but I have questions about whether that's actually going to happen. So the more we can persuade people that this is the direction we've been heading, the more motivating it is. This is from our new survey. We showed that we improve the president's standing on the economy pretty significantly with this frame, especially among some important groups like turnout Democrats had a 22-point gain in their trust on the economy. And also on vote choice, on generic ballot, you see independents, men under 50, and young people. In fact, young people were the biggest movers at 9 points on generic vote choice after having been exposed to this frame and key accomplishments. And we've actually consistently seen that young people respond the strongest. Like sometimes I think people think that young people aren't as motivated by economic issues, perhaps as some other voters, and that is, we've found that to be couldn't be further from the truth. And so the way that we actually, the language that we've tested at Winning Jobs to be able to lean into that economic framing about the economy is about people is this language to the left. This is the closest thing we found. We've tested thousands of messages, hundreds of messages with thousands of voters, and we have found this to be the closest thing to magic words to frame our overall approach. We're working to grow the economy by raising incomes and lowering costs so working people have the tools and opportunities they need to build a good life. We specifically identify working people. That is by far the identity by which the most people connect with, as opposed to working class, as opposed to middle class, working people, and we address their top concern, which is rising costs. And then that can be followed by any number of proof points. The one on the top there, hardworking Americans are bringing our economy back. That's centering working people. They're the heroes, and we're getting things done for them, creating record numbers of good-paying jobs, lowering costs like $35 a month insulin costs, fighting outsourcing. Fighting outsourcing is a very, very big priority for Americans generally, especially for rural Americans, and bringing supply chains home. The numbers on the right tell you we test all of these messages in a system called Blue Rose that is used by a lot of other folks. So we're going head to head, not just with our own messages to know how they work relative to each other, but thousands of messages that are being tested in the same system. And so you see those numbers. That means out of thousands of messages tested by Blue Rose last year, these were some of the best in moving vote choice on congressional vote. We've been doing a bunch of so your statements will come up from the White House. We'll flip the statement to include that frame that I just told you about on the prior screen, and we can move. We've tested them head to head in Blue Rose, and we can move the dial pretty significantly on vote choice on the relative effectiveness of those messages with that frame. So we've been able to prove again and again and again that it works. And frankly, it works better than the language. God bless him, but the language the president is going to continue using is building an economy from the bottom up, middle out, not the top down. It's not going to cause backlash. It's just leaving support on the table because we have found that this more explicit language just works better. And so, an argument that we're making to folks who are trying to row in a progressive direction this year is that we can be a chorus by echoing this frame. And it's not just important for an election; it's important to keep our country moving in a progressive direction. And perhaps no part of America has suffered more under neoliberalism and the attack on government than rural America. And ensuring that we continue to head in this direction of reinvestment in rural communities and an active role for government is really important. And this frame is important in building that support. So a second key imperative is hitting on rising costs. Overwhelmingly, since we started Winning Jobs narrative in the spring of 2021, we've been in the field nonstop with the research since. And it is just unequivocal that overwhelmingly the concerns of most Americans is rising costs. And this was actually from Navigator Research recently. The people in there, so just to show like this is pretty consistent across research as well. They asked people you could pick up to 4 of your concerns, and rising costs were number 1. All the top 4 were about rising costs. So we recently this is brand new data just presented today for the first time. We wanted to see about the kinds of costs that are concerning people the most. And so we asked about a bunch of things: prescription drugs, housing, utilities, food. And we found that food actually overall #1 concern for people. It's the monthly costs, food, gas, fuel, the things that are really repetitive that rise to the top for people. But housing, hugely important as well. We would have bet that it would be here in Qual a lot, frustration from in our focus groups from young people, how angry they are that housing costs, the housing is getting out of reach for them. And lo and behold, it was one of their top issues. And then not to say that any of these are unimportant for people, but the top ones are super important. We think housing, I'll say something more about that in a minute, but that's something that we need to be talking more about. And there is a corporate villain to be pointed out in housing as well. Winning on the reason why we need to win on costs is not just because that it's a top concern of most people, but because there's two competing. There is a story that's going to be told about why people are experiencing rising costs. We're going to hear it nonstop from the right, and they're going to be attacking our agenda, the very agenda that's been about reinvesting in rural communities along with the rest of America. They're going to say that spending is the reason why costs have gone up. We overheated the economy. We injected too much money, and that's to blame. So we're just going to get absolutely hammered with that message from the right through the election. Our side, generally, all of us, we need to be able to compete for that and argue, no, it's not true. Actually, corporate greed is really as much to blame as anything. In fact, there's a lot of data to show that that a majority of rising costs is really all about the choices that corporations are making. And we're actually trying to take on those corporations, and it's not a progressive economic agenda that's to blame. However, we just asked this head to head in our survey, and if you see on the far left, we asked people, which do you think is playing a greater role in rising costs, out of control spending or corporate greed? Right now, in this poll, we were underwater by about 6 points. We do know that voters do believe that corporate greed plays a major factor in a lot of things that they're experiencing. In the 70s, people will say that corporate greed plays a major factor in rising food costs and energy costs and things like that. But there's also a lot of resonance around the idea that spending is also a problem. And so how I respond to this is it's an opportunity. Like, we need to continue hammering as much as possible on the fact that we're experiencing a lot of the pain points we're experiencing are because rich people and giant corporations are making choices that are hurting us because they can. The president, we've talked a lot with people in and around the White House, and this wasn't a surprise to see they're teasing out what's going to be in the State of the Union. He's going to focus. He's going to be looking forward. He's going to be talking about building on things that we've already done to slash prices, and we're going to continue to do that. And he's going to contrast that with, in a number of ways, but including the fact that the counter view, what you can expect from a Donald Trump presidency, among other things, is going to be tax cuts for corporations. He's already said he wants to lower the tax rate for corporations, and taxing corporations is really popular. The 15% minimum tax in the Inflation Reduction Act, hugely popular. There's broad public sentiment, including among rural people, that rich people and corporations are not paying their fair share and need to pay their fair share. So that's a good contrast. We believe that corporations and rich people should pay the taxes they owe, and then if we want to focus our agenda on lowering costs and raising incomes for working folks. The other view is that they're going to cut taxes for those same corporations that are sticking it to you right now. We've tested, as I said, lots of messages about rising costs. They all test really well. There's definitely Eric, I've heard you talk a lot about the populist sentiment that's pretty prevalent in America right now. We absolutely agree strongly. There's a strong populist sentiment, a very strong populist sentiment among rural people. They will respond to a message about paying as strongly or more stronger than anyone else about the fact that we pay 250 times what other countries do for the same prescriptions, for example, or that CEO pay is so vastly outpacing the average worker. That kind of message tests really, really well with rural people. as with anyone else. This is an example of a corporate greed message we tested. Again, you guys are going to have all this. This is about Democrats are going to hold those corporations accountable for taking advantage of American workers and families. Even as inflation slowed, families are still paying higher prices because of corporate greed. Corporations are raising prices of families and raking in record profits, using inflation as an excuse to raise those prices. And then we've started testing lots of different ways to talk about our agenda. The vice president, after the president gave a middle-out economic speech back in the summer, she said, you know, our agenda is simple. It's about putting more money in the pockets of hardworking Americans. So we wanted to test that language. It did really well. Here's some examples of just like, here's the president with I get his Twitter feed is actually a pretty good way to see the contrast in priorities of prioritizing people, taking on costs, and how he's going to contrast. Sherrod Brown, shrinkflation. You're gonna hear the president say shrinkflation in the State of the Union. We tested it. It works. People understand what it means. They understand what greedflation means as well. And here's Sherrod Brown kind of leaning into that. People are angry about food costs, and they're angry about spending more for less. Housing costs. Here's an example of leaning into housing costs. After the election last year, I looked at every single Democratic ad in every remotely competitive House, Senate, or governor's race, and I found one ad on housing costs. It was Stephen Horsford in Nevada 4, and he said we need to crack down on corporate speculators who are buying up housing and driving up prices. I talked to his pollster after the election. He told me it tested off the charts. It's a huge issue in Nevada. That's why you saw Senator Rosen recently introduce legislation to ban hedge funds from buying up housing, and this is popular everywhere. Again, we've tested this issue of wealthy people and corporate investors buying up housing and raising costs on everybody else is prevalent. It's not just in Nevada, not just a Las Vegas problem. Excuse me. It's everywhere, including rural America. Excuse me. There's some differentiation messages that I'll leave with you in here. Erica, you asked a question about that in the last presentation. We have lots of them, and we're going to do more. Also, just one parting thought as a caveat to our imperatives, we think it's critically important to lean into the middle out framing using the language that we know tests the best. We think it's critically important that we have a whole movement focused on taking on corporate greed and lowering prices. That said, there's nothing that is more important widely to Americans than protecting Social Security and Medicare. And this, we did a max dip exercise where people got to pick the number one thing among a list of things, and it was the people who ranked this number one, 64%, and 42% number one, and 64%, I believe, in the top three, and nothing else was really close. And so this message of, we'll die on this hill protecting Social Security and Medicare, and who it surprisingly worked incredibly well with, 18 to 34-year-olds. This isn't just a message for seniors. This is a message for everybody. And here's what we suggest as a message arc. This is, center people. We're the engines of the economy. That's why our side of things, progressives, think the best way to grow the economy is put money back in our pockets. That's why we're fighting to do things like protect Social Security, increase domestic manufacturing, super popular, fighting outsourcing, super popular, and capping cost of insulin. Incidentally, we cap the cost of insulin through for seniors, and then most of the major insulin makers they responded by voluntarily capping their insulin costs at $35 a month. So that policy decision had a cascading effect that impacted millions of Americans, not just seniors. And then forward-looking. We're going to keep fighting to take on rising costs, hold corporations accountable, and prioritize working families. So there's a whole bunch of everything we do, we make public on our website. So there's just tons of resources that you can access and share widely. You can share them with anybody because they're public, they're not unique value. So this can all go absolutely anywhere. And I just made it at 30 minutes, Erica. I did it.
Amazing. Well done. Thank you so much, Bobby. That was a ton of information. And I know that for folks seeing this the first time, some of these slides, and for me, even seeing it for the second and third time, it's a lot to take in and digest. So don't worry if you couldn't catch it all. You're going to get the deck, and I do recommend you take some time, and it can take a little bit of getting used to, like, you know, how they're laying it out and what exactly all those columns are expressing. But once you get the hang of it and see kind of their format, it gets much easier to read these things and make great use of them. So we'll take your questions now. I do want to start with one, and maybe, Bobby, you'll end up just going back to one of the slides that you passed over fairly quickly, which was the differentiation messages. And either that slide and or other information that you may have that's not on that slide. I think, you know, one of the things Ruby is really wrestling with is seeing more and more of the messaging coming out that's kind of like the negative attack stuff against Trump, MAGA Republicans, the fascist threat, the threat to democracy, all the stuff. You guys have seen it everywhere. It's really snowballing. And we do have some questions about whether that's going to resonate well or even potentially backfire with rural voters, working voters, swing voters who are not too keen on partisanship and are kind of just like, hey, you know, enough mudslinging, just tell me what's most important to my life. I already told you my biggest concern is gas and housing prices. So why are you talking about fascism and authoritarianism? I don't care. So we would love to get your take on what's known about this. And if you are gonna say negative things, like, are there best practices around how to do that?
So that's an eternal question. And the truth is that negative messages always perform in testing, always perform worse than positive messages. They just do, because for exactly what you're saying, that people are tired of partisan bickering, and it's frustrating to them. And like, one of the frustrations people have about all of this too is like, can anybody actually even get anything done? They're just fighting with each other. Like, I love all this, it's great, but I have a hard time believing it can actually happen. So we find that being more measured, like just being as factual as possible, and not engaging in hyperbole. Like, I think name calling can be challenging at best. I think especially with rural voters. I think you know, we haven't actually zeroed in on rural voters to see how they react to a phrase like MAGA Republicans, but I would bet that it can be problematic with rural voters. And so we've tried specifically talking about the fact that the Republicans are supporting trickle-down economics. We do find that people understand what trickle-down economics is, and that it is a pejorative. They don't like it. They get it, that it's a bad thing that's about, you know, somehow that if rich people do better, it's going to help us somehow, and that just doesn't work. And so the more factual we can be, the more we can actually contrast with real policy choices, the better. We have found that there are, even when there's going to be a negative message about a Republican, that it might be better to make sure there's a clear contrast. So like, I showed you the one ad that Somos ran in Nevada, a Cortez Masto ad. They had another ad that tested really well, where it was a 30-second spot, and the first 30 seconds was all about how Catherine Cortez Masto is prioritizing everyday Nevadans and taking and doing the things we care about, like lowering costs, bringing back, you know, rebuilding supply chains. But Adam Laxalt is extreme, and he wants to ban abortion, and he cheered the Supreme Court decision. And so that was. And it was a very measured. It was a woman's voice for the voiceover. She wasn't. She was very unemotional about it. It was very just kind of factual. So it wasn't sort it wasn't too heated emotionally, the ad. It worked really well. And so, and we do, I know there's the freedom versus fascism movement, and there's a lot of feeling about from some in the progressive movement that we have to really lean into that because we are facing an existential threat. We just find that we should be, our belief is we should be really careful, that we should, first of all, we've got to be for something. We can't just be against things, and we need to be for working people and the things they care most about, like lowering costs and protecting Social Security. And then contrast with the agenda. We know that contrasting on abortion can be effective. We know that contrasting on economics, that you know, with to the degree that someone is promoting tax cuts that are primarily going to benefit rich people and corporations. And I will say that Erica, I told you I looked at all those ads from Democrats in 2022. In most of the competitive races that I saw, the argument was class-based. The differentiation was class-based. So Johanna Hayes in Connecticut 5, she made an ad where her opponent wasn't a MAGA Republican. He was a corporate lobbyist, and which is, you know, every race comes down to actual people, and you can't apply labels to them that don't actually make sense. And so she talked about her opponent as a corporate lobbyist, and she had an ad where she said, up there in his tower, my opponent is fighting for or down here where us real people live, I'm a teacher, my husband's a cop, you know, we're concerned about everyday costs. That's what I'm fighting to take on. Up there in his corporate tower, my opponent is fighting for tax cuts for the very same energy company that's sticking it to you. And so it was like, there was a Matt Cartwright in, I think, Pennsylvania 17, maybe, actually called his opponent a corporate, I don't know what said the word. He said it in an ad, so I probably shouldn't be embarrassed to say it, but basically a corporate hack with a different word. And that was pretty common. There were where Marcy Kaptur in Ohio, her opponent was at January 6th. So of course she talked about that. Marie Blusenkamp Perez in Washington, she talked about, in very rural districts, she talked about her opponent being extreme. He is, but she really, really leaned into a pro-working class agenda. She talked about right to repair, and like, she talked about how Americans like to fix shit. She said shit in an ad. You know, that's what she's fighting for, is like, you should be able to fix your own stuff. You shouldn't have to go to some dealer that's going to charge you through the nose. So we think a class-based differentiation should be the lead, really. Like, everyone on our side should be wrapping themselves in working class identity and really leaning into prioritizing working people and a populist economic agenda, and then be careful in making the contrast, not to be overheated, and actually to lift up where possible where people have tried to be bipartisan on, you know, like I've heard some, including some of the folks associated with some other narrative work, say that it's kind of shaming Democrats for talking about their ways they tried to be bipartisan. I couldn't disagree more. I think I think people want to extreme on something. We can still say that ideally we'd like to be able to work across the aisle and get things done for people. And we have seen generally that bipartisan references actually lift messages. They absolutely do.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, I see a hand up from Beth Angel. Beth, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. I just have a issue that has kind of bothered me a lot. During the campaign, they say a lot of things, and then when they get elected, things are changed. Biden threw the rail workers under the bus. He's been backtracking on environmental protections and fossil fuel production. And frankly, I don't really trust what he's saying. Not that I trust the Republicans, I think they're worse, but I really don't trust the Democrats or a lot of the Democratic Party, not all of them, that they're going to come through with what they're positing. So I'd like your comments on that if you could. Did I say it right?
I suspect there are, I mean, from everything I've seen, there are a lot of people who share your views. And so, I mean, I think for people who are trying to, I assume a number of you are actually going to be working on campaigns. You're going to be trying to get people elected. And I assume that's going to be more Democrats than not. And I think that my personal recommendation is to not pretend like Democrats are the answer to everything and the be all end all. That's what I do in my own life with people that I have a lot of Republicans in my life, and I don't do that. And I find that by talking about what we should be doing, and then what Democrats are doing well and not doing well, and Republicans are doing well and not doing well, and then be able to talk about a particular choice we have between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, to me is how we reach people, because I think people need to feel heard. That, you know, and you expressing your doubt about both parties is how most people feel. That makes them feel heard if you say that. So in your own organizing, outreach, whatever you're doing, I think my guess is that's probably a very effective thing to say. I mean, ultimately, we do have a choice. And we do hope that Donald Trump doesn't see another term ever in our lives, because that's the unthinkable. And you know, we also, and just again in my own personal life, my argument to people is, I'm not marrying this candidate. I'm choosing a direction. And that is all it is a step in a direction. And then once they're elected, we keep trying to make that direction. And in the next election, we keep trying to make that direction. And so who gets us closer to where we want to be policy wise between the choice we have.
Yeah, let me just add one thing to that, Beth, because I mean, I think so many progressives feel like you do, like we always have our disappointments. The person we want running is never running. But if it helps give you a little boost of inspiration so that, you know, you feel better about getting out there campaigning for Biden and other Democrats, we do have on our website a really good list of achievements that Anthony put together of things that the Biden administration has done. And it's kind of easy to forget over the course of the 4 years, all the positive things that have happened, particularly, you know, in terms of like economic development and infrastructure and support for family farms and things that really have had an impact in rural America. And I, you know, when I need a little lift, I go back and look at that list and I'm like, oh yeah, actually Biden has done more than any president I can remember in a long time, as much as there's so many things I still wish I could change. So I'll ask Jackie if you're able to find that on the website and post that in the chat. And if you can't, Jackie, I'll be able to find it. Let's see, Francesca.
Hi, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting, and I really do appreciate the work that you're doing and raising an awareness about what's going on in our rural communities. So what I am concerned about, I guess, is that I think so many times we spend a lot of our energy and resources on messaging, on developing messages, on communicating those messages to voters. And then, but what I worry about is that there doesn't seem to be action after the messages. And, you know, I've heard, you know, so many of my people that I voted for, Democrats, who deliver a beautiful message. And once they get into office, that message literally disappears because, you know, again, because, you know, there's so much corporate control over our candidates. They're worried about re-election and things like that. So I guess my question is, do the messages, have you seen that messages translate to action?
Well, so here's my personal perspective about action. And Erica mentioned early on that I worked on marriage equality. I was actually at an organization called ProgressNow until right about 2010, and ProgressNow we work on a lot of things like pushing a progressive agenda in the States. And I'm gay, and I wanted to get a chance to work on marriage equality. So I had an opportunity to become vice president for communications at Gill Foundation, largest funder of equality work. And when I went there, we'd lost 28 races in a row, 28 states in a row. And like marriage was not going well. And there were times, like I remember in 2006 in Colorado, we lost a marriage ban and we lost a pro civil union measure, and Democrats won mostly things. And I remember being at that Democratic celebration that night, and everyone was so happy and celebrating, and I was devastated. And I thought, I bet, if just everyone in this room, if everyone who calls themselves had voted for this, we probably would have passed it. And there weren't any politicians who were championing us, and and so I wanted to stand up on stage and say, the heck with all of you. I like that's a legitimate feeling. I think my view is that on a lot of the issues we work on the left, the thing that ultimately won marriage is because our theory from the beginning of that in 2005, when we wrote out the plan for how we'd win, it was our job to win a majority of the public. We can't expect electeds to get out ahead of what the public is. We just can't. They're not courageous people. Generally, like they want to protect their seats. And so our job as issue advocates is to lay the groundwork and make sure that we build the public support so that they're not too far out ahead of people, and they can take the votes that we need them to take. And that's how marriage out. Like we did the hard work of figuring out how, and the story that we tell. Like we were telling a story for the first, from 2005 through 2008. Our story that we were trying to tell people was, hey, this isn't even about marriage. This is about basic civil rights. And so, like, we understand you're not supportive of marriage, but do you really want to deny people hospital visitation? And we weren't growing support. We shifted the story ultimately to being like, this is actually about love and commitment. We are the same. We fall in love and want to make a lifetime commitment. That's how we started building support. We as advocates found out how to do it, how to connect with people, and how to start building a sense of connection, sense of shared identity, and making the story one that people could relate to. That's when we started shifting, and we started seeing politicians come along, and we just got more and more momentum. But it was bad for a long time. And the goal of Winning Jobs narrative is a lot of our job on the left is not to, this is my view at least, our job is, a lot of our communicating is targeted to our electeds and across issues, whether it's climate or whatever. And we think, I've talked to a lot of climate funders, and they agree with me that the climate movement has positioned themselves as being sort of like elite facing in their communicating instead of being public facing, and laying the groundwork that we need to have broad support for the things we want to advocate for. And we've got to shift our thinking on the left. We can go win majorities, and rural people can be among them, especially on economic issues. And so I hear you. I share your frustration. I've been there many times in my life, and but that's my theory and approach.
Thank you.
Thanks. Clarice, I was just about to read your question off the chat, but why don't you go ahead and ask yourself?
Which one?
Clarice McKinney, you.
No, I mean, which question?
Oh, well, it was, I just started to see one about like, what's like really like the top line, best thing to say, like in a letter to the editor in rural Idaho.
Yes. And before I ask that question, let me just say, the reason I raised my hand was because I think that we have the same issue going on right now with regard to preferences for pronouns. I'm in a rural upstate Idaho community that's really mega, but even in more purple kinds of areas, I hear this a lot, that that just was thrown on us really, really quick. And a lot of us who move in elite circles, so to speak, we were even blown away first. But if only they had done the same thing Bobby Clark did with marriage equality, I think that would have made a huge difference. Okay. Anyway, my question was, for those of us in these rural communities, especially in the red areas, and mine is so heavy red, the only chances we get for the most part to get messages out in our community are through letters to the editor, and people read them very faithfully, and it's really a good system for us. But I don't want to flood the papers with it. I just want to really zero in on the messages that you have found, Mr. Clark, that are the most important for the rural communities to hear in a way that you have found they most broadly accept and understand.
So the two strategic imperatives that we highlighted for the year, talking about like the approach that we need to have to growing our economy, strengthening our economy, is to put families first. Like, we are the economy. We're the pillars of our communities. We're the engines of our economy. Our economic well-being, the country's economic well-being, depends on ours. And we've been backwards for too long. We've had policies that have dominated, that have been all about deregulating, letting corporations do what they want, not enforcing our antitrust laws, and tax cuts that largely benefit the rich and corporations. And that is, we saw from the New Deal until 1980, income equality was going down, 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 down. And then along comes Ronald Reagan, who says government's the problem. We need to get government out of the way. And the champion of free market economics. And it's a perfect V from 1980 to now. Income inequality going up, 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 up. Like, policies that preference the capital holders and corporations do not inherently benefit the rest of us. My husband works in corporate America. Corporate America is, does everything that they can to make sure that they protect themselves and they protect their shareholders. That's what corporations do. They're like a wild animal. They have a nature, and so that's why we need our government to make sure that we alter the rules so that we actually are making sure that working people are being prioritized. And everything, the thing about, for anyone who read the New York Times article, column, calling Joe Biden the first post-Reagan president. Like, he has been remarkable in a whole host of ways. He has been remarkably progressive economically, and that has been a really, really important shift for rural America. So I think maybe there are things that he's done that are disappointing, but that is really exciting.
Great, thanks. We're getting close to the hour, so I'll ask people to keep their questions as quick as possible if you can. Let's go to you, Jabe Blumenthal.
Yeah, I'll just make a very quick comment. I wanted to go back to something that had been asked of Bobby and an answer, and just to put a fine point on it. I'm on Bobby's advisory committee at the Winning Jobs Narrative, as well as being a supporter of Ruby. And the kind of messages that the Winning Jobs Narrative is coming out with, it's going to make, the kind of difference it makes is 2 and 3 and 4% differences in how people think and vote, which is huge. I don't want to say that making that seem small. Like, that is going to be the difference between winning the presidency or not, between control of the House or not, control of the Senate or not. But if you want to actually start passing legislation, you have to do much, much more than that. You have to get to the point where the elected officials feel like, oh, I didn't just gain 2 to 3% more votes by having popular messaging and framing. There's actually been enough years of that messaging and framing that there's been a cultural shift. And it's the cultural shift that then makes it possible to do those sweeping things. Like in Washington State, we spent years trying to get the legislature to pass a capital gains tax. And it took us the candidates started using that message for 4 years, but it took 8 years before we then had enough candidates succeeding with that messaging, and that messaging being ubiquitous enough that there was an actual cultural change among the voters. And only then did the legislators feel like, it's safe to now pass the capital gains tax. So I think it just underscores how long-term the work of Ruby and the winning jobs narrative is. And I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thanks, Jabe.
Craig Schwartz.
Hi, hey, thanks for setting this up, Bobby. I really enjoyed some of your talking points. I'm going to be able to use them. I'm running for the Ohio House, 87th District of Northwest Ohio. I'm also the Rural Caucus Chair for the Ohio Democratic Party. And I wear a third hat, which is I'm on the board of directors for the Ohio Public Banking Coalition. And I just want to advise you that our messaging is for the public bank that we're trying to create here based on a model of North Dakota. We've got a resolution that's being vetted in the Ohio House now as we speak, early stages, is to build in those values that you were espousing earlier and trying to bridge that gap between rural and urban, because the sponsors that I've got for the public bank are actually going to be from the Cleveland area. But it helps the rural area, the rural voters the most, and that's what we're trying to get that message across. I'm also a member of Reimagine Appalachia, and I've mentioned the public banking resolution that we're going to try to get adopted here. And it does resonate quite well. I just wanted to bring that out, and I really enjoy the messaging that you bring to the table here too. It's going to help me in my campaign. Thank you.
I had a chance to present at a foundation conference in December with, I forget his name, but he's on the city council in Chicago and advocates for public structure generally. Like, they're actually advocating for public groceries. And his pitch is like, if the city can run an airport, they can run a grocery. Because they're like, it's just unacceptable that there are food deserts. There are parts of Chicago that just cannot be served by or will not be served by corporations. And so we haven't done testing on public structures. If we did, they would be public on our website. And since you're a candidate, I will say everything I've said, everything that is on the website is all public. There's nothing that I am sharing or have shared that is of unique value. So it's absolutely fine for anybody to use it.
Best of luck to you, Craig, in your campaign. I've been dying to see someone run on public banking or public anything. So that's great.
One more thing that we've talked about a lot on Winning Jobs is it's not just that working people should be prioritized, but that the right role for government is to make sure that everyone, no matter their circumstance in life, no matter where they live, have the tools and the opportunities they need to build a good life and build their communities. And there is broad public, there really is no purchase in the public for the anti-government message. There really isn't. The question is, how should government be prioritized? And this idea that government should prioritize making sure that everyone has the basic tools to build their own life and build their communities is just broadly resonant.
Yeah, and I just want to underscore one thing Bobby just said that people might not be aware of if you're not reading things coming from the right, but I happen to, I do that. And I saw a really interesting study from the American Compass where they surveyed Republican voters and found that this kind of like Reagan era, big government is the boogeyman. We don't want government doing anything. We need to shrink government and drown it in the bathtub kind of stuff is really, the tide has really turned on that. And there is much more receptivity even among Republicans to government taking a more active role. I don't want to overplay that. I think there's still a long way to go before they, they're not socialists, but it's not as extreme as it used to be. Okay, let's Bobby, if you can, it's 2:00, but do you want to stay on for a couple more questions?
Yeah.
Great. Murray.
Yeah, just a couple of quick points, and I'd like your feedback. I don't know, have you read Rachel Bitkoffer's new book about Hit 'em Where It Hurts? And a point she makes is to be take the gloves off and be a little more aggressive. And her 4 areas she mentions are that talk about the Republican threat to our freedom, our health, our wealth, and our safety. And I think a lot of the stuff you've talked about can fit in those categories. And then the second point, I live in a very extreme rural red area in Minnesota. And one thing I've noticed that a lot of the rural areas, the communities, if you drive through the communities, are really becoming more and more depressed. A lot of the businesses have left from what they used to be. And I think that's something that can be pointed out as an example of, you know, red has controlled these for many years, and yet the communities are not necessarily doing better because of that. So I think that's one example of something that can be shared and worked on.
Great. You know, there was one question in the chat, and Bobby, I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse or not, but it's kind of interesting, which is someone is asking if you have any insight on why it is that working class voters would believe at all that cutting taxes for the rich is going to benefit them. Like, where does this, how did this trickle down mentality sink in the first place and endure?
Well, you know, like that, Jabe has pointed out before, as we've been on this journey of comparing the two visions, that's not exactly. They don't say that they're. We're the ones who say that their tax cuts are benefiting the rich and corporations, and they talk about it as, you know, like these are that everyone benefits. These are tax cuts for everybody. They talk about tax cuts just sort of generally, and that's tempting for people because, you know, like every little bit matters, and so the idea of for a, you know, working family to get a tax cut is appealing. The truth is that those tax cuts primarily benefit the rich corporations, and we found that it's easy to turn. It's actually easy to hit that nerve and turn people against tax cuts. They absolutely do not want tax cuts for the rich and corporations. So if we, you know, we highlight the fact that tax cuts largely benefit the rich and corporations. The other thing that we explored in qualitative back in the fall is we wanted to see if we could, how we could sort of provoke zero-sum thinking of our own, that like this is going to loss aversion, like tax cuts that primarily benefit the rich. We thought we needed to make an argument for how that's going to hurt you, and not just that it disproportionately helps them, but it would actually hurt you. And like, so we were prepared to explore all sorts of ways of, like, you know, highlighting Social Security or whatever. We didn't have to, like, just all we had to do is suggest that these tax cuts primarily benefit the rich and corporations, and people immediately thought that would be a burden on them. Like, they didn't assume necessarily that programs would be cut. They just assumed that the burden would be shifted to them, and it was so universal in qual. We haven't actually tested that in quant, but it's clear that there's an impulse that people have that if the tax cuts for corporations and the rich, you know, are probably inherently a bad thing for me. And they don't have to be persuaded that much. They just have to be, we just have to suggest it.
Cody, any last question in the chat I might have missed that you want to lift up here? I will say someone asked me if about whether there's differences in winning job narratives data, whether you're finding differences across race. And from what I've seen, you guys almost always do breakouts for race and education status and all those things, right? So that's there.
Yeah, and a lot of our, I mean, in everything we do, we you know, look very broadly, because our goal was something that works across race and geography and even ideology. And what we found is this core narrative, it works with everybody. And even surprisingly so, like the middle out framing, working people are the engines of the economy, we need to lower costs, raise incomes for working people, that it would work so well. Like, we had another organization put it in a survey that they did, and 65% in their survey of young people strongly agreed with that statement. They were among the most enthusiastic of all the demographics for that statement. And so, and the work values, like leaning, you know, talking about how we need to respect work, and, you know, and we need to make sure that work is valued, like that. Like, some people think about that. We've had people critique us at times and say, like, that's a white working class message. Oh no. That actually tests better with Latinos and African Americans and API than it does with white people even. Like, that work values are strongly held across race and geography.
Great, good to know. Okay, Beth, I'm going to give the last question to you. And then before, since people might start trickling off, but I just want to mention before everyone goes that next month, we're going to continue in our communication series with a presenter from Galvanize Action, which is another really amazing group that is one of the few, again, that really focuses on rural, and their focus is specifically white rural women. And they do really creative stuff, like they do the research and then they put it into like funny memes and videos. And I think that presentation is going to be a lot of fun. So I hope you all can come back for that one. And Beth, last question to you.
Really quick, and this came from a question that somebody put in the chat. Bobby, could you address quickly how you fold messaging about immigration into this?
We have it. So if you go to winningjobsnarrative.org and scroll down and look at our library, you'll actually find an immigration test. I've done a lot of work on immigration. For years, I was primarily working in immigration after I left Gill Foundation. And so there's part of Winning Jobs. One of the ways that Winning Jobs is cultural is like for us to be able to communicate in ways that working class people, rural people can feel like, oh, you're the same as me, you think the same as me, we're the same. Like that's part of the value of Winning Jobs narrative, is to give us the language to be able to have to be able to create identification. And somebody mentioned earlier the he him. I mean, if you look at I have he him on my you know, from the LGBT movement, Latinx, you know, there's a lot of things that we do as progressives to virtue signal to each other that we get it and we're on the same team. And a lot of those things create, we don't mean to, but they create distance between us and people who are not living our lives every day and, you know, interrogating everything and thinking about all this. And so that's the idea of Winning Jobs, is like, let's provide language that people can use to reconnect with working class and rural voters and build from there. And so immigration is another issue that in-group, out-group, that identification is really important. LGBT for marriage, it was like when we shifted to love and commitment, that was about creating identification. Like we're the same, so don't other us. We're not some other people we're asking for you to treat fairly. We are the same as you. Immigration is one of those issues too. There's a reason why Republicans want the conversation to remain about the border and about people who are just coming here. Immigration is a much bigger issue than the border and people who are just arriving, but they want to center the conversation there because they want you to think, when you think of immigration, think about those people queued up who you don't know, who might be a threat. They're not us. What we have found is we need to relate immigration. We need to start by relating immigration more broadly to people. First, by placing it within our broader frame, which is like we're focused on prioritizing everyday people. We believe working people are the engine of the economy, so we're working to lower costs, raising incomes for working people. Immigration, immigrants there are millions of immigrants right here in our communities contributing in lots of ways, including billions of dollars in federal taxes through voluntary programs. They're enriching our lives, strengthening our communities, strengthening our economy. Of course, we need to have an orderly process and a secure border. There is no legitimate debate about that. We also need to have a functioning system. And so we need immigration. Basically remind people that immigrants are us. They're here in our communities contributing in lots of ways, including economically. We agree with you. Security is a concern, border security, having an orderly process. We agree. There's no difference there. We need to have immigration function. We actually need the parties to come together and figure that out. And so like you take the heat out of it, you reposition the conversation as being about immigrants or us, and then frame it also in terms of like, we're not reducing immigrants to economic actors, but we're saying that they contribute. They're part of us, including economically. And then of course we need to have a secure border and orderly process. And
that's super helpful. Really, really helpful. Thanks.
Okay. Well, this whole thing has been incredibly helpful. and tons of information for us all to process. Thank you so much, Bobby, for presenting all of this and all your work. And thanks everyone for being here. We look forward to seeing you next month. Bye-bye.